He's had more appearances on film or screen than any other superhero, and he's got the toys to show for it. Let's celebrate the history of Batman at the movies. Hey y'all, and welcome back to Carbon Scoring, the best place for comics history and action figures. We are going through 60 years of Batman on film, looking at all the different toys produced along the way. And we're going to take a look at action figures from The Dark Knight's most recent film, starring Robert Pattinson and Zoe Kravitz, The Batman. It was only 4 short years after Batman's first appearance in Detective Comics 27 back in May of 1939 that the Caped Crusader appeared on the silver screen in 1943's 15-part movie serial. While the film added vital parts to the Batman mythos, including the Batcave, it also featured some pretty cringeworthy Asian stereotypes common to the era. It would be 20 years before Batman would again appear on the screen, but it would be worth the wait. It took almost 50 years to sort out the tangled rights agreements that precluded the production of Batman 66 figures. But once they were settled, the floodgates opened and we got some incredible product from this iconic show, perhaps none greater than the 2021 McFarlane Batman figure. This thing hits all of the high notes that you need in an Adam West Batman, from the physique of the figure being maybe not quite as superheroic as some of the other action figures that we got, to the classic bat symbol emblem on his chest, his utility belt, which I'm sure is packed with some bat shark repellent in there, down to his boots, and most especially that cowl. Oh my gosh, look at how great this is. The bat ears look like they're just glued onto the side of his mask. He has the drawn-on eyebrows and that little blue line over his nose. And of course, just like on the show, you can see his pupils. Plus, they did a fantastic job of sculpting Adam West's chin on this figure so that it is very, very accurate to the actor who portrayed Batman. Plus, this figure has some sneaky good articulation, particularly for a McFarlane figure. There are ball-jointed shoulders hidden up underneath here, and not only does he have good range at the elbow, there's a twist, so you can get great articulation there, as well as twist at the wrist and at the hands. And the same can be said at the knees. You would think that this is just a simple knee joint, but it actually has a twist bend associated with it. And the beauty of all this articulation is that it doesn't take away from the simplistic look of the figure. The success of the Batman TV series opened the Caped Crusader to an entirely new market, kids. And 1973 brought the premiere of the Superfriends, becoming the defining image of Batman for kids of the 1970s and 1980s. The renowned artist-illustrator Alex Toth was primarily responsible for the designs of the Superfriends. And in 2003, DC Direct brought his artistic creations to three-dimensional life with their Superfriends line of action figures. You can clearly see how the Batman 66 television show influenced the design of Batman's Superfriends character, particularly with the cowl. It has the black highlights across the front of his face, as well as the lighter blue highlights above his eyebrows and across his nose. But it wasn't simply based on the 66 television show. There are also very heavy comic influences in this design as well, particularly with the Neil Adams-inspired ears and utility belt. Now, this figure was meant as a collector's piece, and so it wasn't as focused on articulation so much as it is on getting that sculpt so perfect to accurately portray the look of Batman from Superfriends. He does still have really cool ball-jointed shoulders, but the remainder of his articulation is relatively standard, which is completely okay, because this thing is straight out of my childhood Saturday mornings, and I couldn't be happier with the look of this figure. While the comics never fully caved in to the campy, kiddie versions of Batman more familiar to the general public, it wasn't until 1986, with the publication of Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, that the public perception of the Caped Crusader changed. And that switch led to a pop culture phenomenon. Tim Burton's 1989 Batman film. It's almost impossible to describe the anticipation for this movie, which redefined the superhero genre. You want to know how cool this movie was? Prince did the theme song. This is my original Batman the movie figure from 1989. I purchased this new at Toys R Us over 30 years ago, and it still looks just as great as the day that I got it. Somehow Kenner had allowed their license for Batman toys to lapse, and this toy was produced by Toy Biz. That's right, Toy Biz, the company that not only became synonymous with Marvel figures, they actually owned Marvel at one point. But when they were simply an upstart company, they grabbed the license to the 1989 Batman movie and produced this Batman figure, Joker, and Bob the Goon? It was a pretty limited run of figures, but where they really focused were on accessories, Batmobiles, Batwings, all of those great things. And this figure fit perfectly in with them. Now, a lot of people think that this is simply a repaint of the Kenner Superpowers Batman figure. And I think that's because of the shape of his arms, the fact that they're kind of bent at the elbow. But it's not. This is a completely new sculpt. And you can see that with the pieces down along his shins, his wrist guards, and even the chest plate is a completely new sculpt. But this thing is just so awesome. It has standard articulation for the day with simple joints at the shoulders and at the hips, but he does bend at the knees, which was so important for getting him into all of those different vehicles that came with this line. He has fairly limited articulation at the neck, which honestly may make it the most screen accurate Batman figure ever made. But where this figure really stands out is with his play feature, because right here on his belt, it creates a batarang that allows you to pull the figure up. Oh, how many kids in the 80s and 90s must have worn this spring completely out? It is just such a cool feature that fits in seamlessly with the figure. Batman 89 was a complete pop culture revelation, and this figure was in the homes of virtually every kid at the time. 1991 saw Burton's excellent sequel, Batman Returns. By this time, the toy license had gone back to Kenner, and their focus for figures was decidedly more kid-friendly. This was when things took a turn for the worst with Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever, whose garish colors were splattered all across the action figure aisle. And then the low point, 1997's Batman and Robin, which exposed an unsuspecting world to the horror of bat nipples. The toy line was exactly what you would expect from this abomination, with such screen-accurate figures as Razor Skate Robin and Snow Tracker Batman. But out of that blinding neon light came the darkness. While the movies did their best to ruin Batman, it was the world of animation that would provide us with the definitive take on the Caped Crusader with 1992's Batman the Animated Series. Batman the Animated Series is considered by many the definitive version of the Caped Crusader, and I am not about to argue with that. And thankfully, we have gotten versions of the character in multiple scales across several different toy lines, beginning with the original 4-inch figures that came out during the time of the cartoon. This is actually the Batman from Batman the New Adventures, the second version of the cartoon, and I really love this Bruce Timm design with the broad shoulders and the small, tiny waist. The first version had the yellow bat symbol, whereas the second had the more modern, actually throwback, and then again modern, black bat symbol on the chest. But this looks exactly like the artwork of the cartoon. Such an incredible figure. Simple articulation because, honestly, this was a kid's toy, but that also fit the design of the series. More recently, Todd McFarlane's production has produced a 7-inch version of an animated Batman. Now, this one takes a little bit more liberties. It's not quite as accurate to the original cartoon, but it's certainly in that same flavor. The shoulders are a little broader. He does have some added articulation. This guy is not very easy to get to stand up on those tiny little ankles with those huge shoulders, but what an imposing Batman figure and the shadow that this casts over the other figures in our collection. Perhaps the greatest line of Batman the Animated Series figures was DC Direct's 6-inch line. They went through the entire gamut of Batman animated cartoons to produce figures throughout the entire run, and this one is specifically from the movie Batman Mask of the Phantasm. That is perhaps the best Batman movie ever created. Many people have it ranked even above the Christopher Nolan films, and if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. But this figure very, very accurately captures the look of Batman from Mask of the Phantasm. Following the smash success of the animated series, Bruce Timm expanded Batman's cartoon universe with the Justice League. As great as Batman the Animated Series was, Justice League may have actually been a little bit better. They made the brilliant decision to keep Kevin Conroy as the voice actor for Batman, providing continuity for the character, but they did make some subtle changes to his design. Justice League actually came out after Batman Beyond, and they took some of the aesthetic of the Batman Beyond cartoon and added it to the Batman for Justice League, including the longer ears and the slimmer silhouette for the Caped Crusader. Now, as the cartoon went on, they produced more articulated figures, including this Batman, which has really double the points of articulation of the previous ones. But for my money, I really love the clean lines and easy design of this original Batman Justice League figure because it so perfectly captures the look that we saw on the screen. 2004 brought a new vision and direction to Batman's animated adventures with a look at the early years of the Dark Knight's crusade with The Batman. The Batman was a real departure from the previous decade plus of Batman animated series. It wasn't universally loved at the time that it came out, but it's become a bit of a cult classic, mainly because of its anime and manga-inspired designs, which you can clearly see with this redesigned cowl and the oversized hands and feet of the Batman figure. This show took some real chances and made some bold statements with character design, and the toy line fell right in line with that as we got really creative versions of characters like Firefly and the Joker. I need to go back and revisit this series because it's a bit of a missing link in the Batman visual history, but it's a really, really cool addition. After the lukewarm response to the Batman, it was time to change gears. And boy, did they ever, with Batman the Brave and the Bold. How much fun is this? Batman the Brave and the Bold ran on Cartoon Network from 2008 until 2011 and was a lighthearted team-up show that leaned heavily into that 1960s vibe of the comic book that it was based off of. And you can see that clearly in the character design with his Batman 66 inspired cowl and his Superfriends-esque cartoonish nature. This show was legitimately funny, and Batman played the straight man for many of his guest stars on the show, which included the likes of Enemy Ace, Buona Beast, and even Space Ghost. Yeah, this was the team-up that you had no idea that you needed until you finally saw it. These toys were clearly aimed for kids as they're built to be modulated with different accessories that you can put on it, but they still managed to keep that great vibe of the cartoon. Batman can be funny, and when done right, it's an absolute blast. By now, almost a decade had passed since the horror show of Batman and Robin, and it was time to bring the Caped Crusader back to the silver screen. British filmmaker and Academy Award-winning director Christopher Nolan brought a more grounded, realistic tone to his Dark Knight trilogy, starring Christian Bale as Batman and Heath Ledger as a stunning, unforgettable, riveting Joker. Mattel's Movie Masters line produced gorgeous, screen-accurate versions of characters from across Christopher Nolan's trilogy of films, but they saved their best for the Batman. This version of Batman from Batman Begins is an absolute perfect action figure. It completely captures the look of Batman's armor down to the minute detail from the film, and it has a stunningly excellent head sculpt reflecting Christian Bale's time underneath the cowl. But what I really like about this figure is, unlike a lot of our previous Batman movie figures, this one has far more articulation. You can get him into some really, really serious poses, and he looks great in them, which I think actually goes really well with the film because we saw a much more nimble Batman in the Nolan trilogy than we had seen previously. And a lot of that was the design of the armor that Batman was wearing. Now, as great as the Batman Begins armor was, the Dark Knight Returns armor may have been even better. This figure manages to get down to every little bit of Kevlar detail throughout Batman's suit, all the while maintaining that great head sculpt and the articulation that we have now come to expect from our 6-inch action figures. These figures from Mattel in their Movie Masters line were truly a high point and deserving of the excellent films that they represented. So with Nolan's story complete, and Marvel mopping up the box office with smash hits like The Avengers, DC turned over the reins to their own cinematic universe to Zack Snyder.
Save Martha! Why did you say that name?
Say what you will about Zack Snyder's interpretation of Batman, and my mama taught me that if you can't say anything nice, you shouldn't say anything at all. But you can't blame the action figures. These things are absolutely terrific. This is the Batman from Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. And what I really love about this figure is, one, it has a very, very Dark Knight vibe to it, with the shorter ears and the bulkier, stockier Batman. I love that huge bat symbol across the chest. And most importantly, I like the fact that it brings the silver back into Batman's costume. You know, most of the Batmen that we have seen throughout this video are rooted in some kind of gray and black combination. And this is one of the first times that we really saw that on screen, and I think it works. They did a great job of capturing Ben Affleck's head sculpt here, and you've got the anticipated articulation from a figure of this era. That's a really, really nice figure for a movie that I utterly despise. And speaking of that, and of course borrowing from the greatest aspects of the past, here is the Batman from the final scene where he's fighting Superman, and this is a just straight ripoff of Frank Miller's designs from the final battle scene between Batman and Superman at the end of the Dark Knight Returns comic. And hey, look, if you're gonna steal something, at least steal from the best, and they certainly did that. And this figure really does capture that. It captures the big, kind of clunky chunkiness of the armor that Batman wore in the comic, and they did a good job of translating that to the silver screen. When it comes to Batman from Justice League, unfortunately, we're back to the all-black suit, and I get how that would look really good in the movies and on screen, but it creates a little bit more of a boring action figure, particularly when you compare it to the multiple tones that we had gotten previously. But I guess if I just make this video like 3 hours longer, then it'll get a whole lot better reception. So now we come to the latest release, The Batman. Apparently, a back-to-basics story for the world's greatest detective. So I'm a comic book guy first and foremost, but I'm not one of those comic book guys that says any kind of changes from the original source material is bad. I really don't believe that. I think that the movies have made some really incredible changes to the comic book source material and have made things better because of that. An example would be, I love Tom Holland's Spider-Man, but his stories and all of that Stark tech is so far from the comics, but because they kept the characterization the same, because at the core, Peter Parker is still Peter Parker, I love those movies. By that same token, when Batman mows down criminals with the Batmobile and explodes walls and drops it on them, killing people, I don't think that's a change that's consistent with the character. So, if you stay within the core bounds of the character, I'm cool with it. If you start making a bunch of wholesale changes, I'm not really going to be down with that. So with that said, I know that this new movie, The Batman, is meant to be kind of a back to basics and a reworking of the story. And I'm all right with that. And I particularly like this Riddler figure. It has the core concepts of the Riddler that we're used to. He's green, and he's got a question mark. Now, granted, he's not wearing a full body leotard. He doesn't have a purple mask, although his face is covered, and he's got these kind of super cool clear glasses going on. But this dude is just straight up creepy. I mean, look at the duct tape over his mouth, and I'm not sure what's going on with this like saran wrap around his head. I am very, very interested to see the Riddler in this movie and how he challenges Batman mentally. One of the things that I have felt like was missing from a lot of the Bat movies was Batman as the world's greatest detective. And I think we're going to get to see some of that in The Batman because of the challenge that the Riddler poses. Now, Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman looks pretty awesome. I mean, from the teaser trailers, she looks absolutely incredible. And this figure is really, really nice. Lots of sculpted detail in this black cat suit. Really solid. Nice face sculpt underneath that mask. And when you turn her head, you can actually see the skin of her chin and her neck. So it really does look like it's a mask covering her head. Now, as I've already admitted in this video, I'm a child of the 80s. And so I am very familiar with Zoe Kravitz's parents. Her mother, I know as being one of the Cosby kids, and her father as the rock star Lenny Kravitz, who I actually remember when he went by the name Romeo Blue. Yes, I think it's important that we never let Lenny Kravitz get away with the fact that he once called himself Romeo Blue. Now, my one gripe about this figure is, what are these ankle joints? I mean, what? Really? First of all, this is such a gorgeous aesthetic, and the articulation really doesn't cut into the look of the figure until you get these bonkers, ball joints down at the ankle. Not really sure what they were thinking there, but anyway, still, I think really good looking figure. But here's the one that we all came to see. Robert Pattinson as the Batman. Now, I've only read just a little bit online, and I've tried not to spoil this movie for myself, but I've read that, his look is supposed to be something that he could have put together himself. And so it really is kind of a body armor look with knee pads. The bat symbol looks like it's something that's kind of wedged onto the front of his, armored costume. He has a very, very tactical looking bat belt with hooks and different pouches coming off of it, something that you could, possibly get at the store. And then you can see the different seams on his cowl where he has stitched it together. And McFarlane Productions did a great job of getting all of that stitching detail, even around the nose right there on this figure. I'm not exactly sure how he got Destro's wrist rockets. He's got them, it looks like, on both hands. So I suppose he has like a contact with Mars or something like that, the arms manufacturer that Destro has. And I gotta say, I don't really know what's up with the constant side eye. Hopefully you guys can see that on the film, but he's looking hard to his left. And when I glance at this figure and when I've watched it in the trailers, there's something about the way the cape and the cowl kind of sits on his neck and up around his neck that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And then I realized it looks like the Batman from Gotham by Gaslight, the Victorian era Mike Mignola Elseworlds comic. And maybe you guys can see that, how the way that collar sits up around his neck is similar to this, and the way the rest of the cape kind of falls across his shoulders. It just really struck me as a Gotham by Gaslight type of design, which is cool. Everybody needs a little steampunk Batman in their world. But hopefully this movie lives up to the hype, and I cannot wait to see these figures live on the silver screen. There have been more than enough Batman to satisfy any fan's cravings, but if you want to see what I consider the definitive take on the Dark Knight, check out this video on Batman the Animated Series. And while you're at it, you've made it this far, you're clearly into this, give us a like, hit subscribe, and ring that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all the good stuff coming from Carbon Scoring.